My name is Victoria, and I turned 24 today. But instead of celebrating with friends or blowing out candles, I was pulling a 12-hour shift at the hospital. I thought the day would be uneventful, just another long rotation caring for patients. I was wrong. Around midday, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I expected a birthday message, maybe from a cousin or an old friend. Instead, I saw my father's name. The words on the screen froze me in place. "We sold your car. Family comes first. Be grateful we let you live here rent-free." My heart pounded. My car. The car I had worked 2 years to buy, saving every dollar from babysitting jobs, grocery store shifts, and later my nursing salary, gone just like that. Before I could even catch my breath, another message arrived. "Oh, and Derek starts college next month. You'll cover his first semester. 5,800 due this week." I remember gripping the phone so tightly, my knuckles ached. A cold wave washed over me. They had taken from me before scholarship money, gifts from relatives, anything they deemed family property. But this felt different. This was theft. This was betrayal. This was my independence ripped away on the very day I was supposed to feel most alive. I slipped into the supply closet for privacy, my mind spinning. My father's voice was so clear in that text, even though I hadn't heard it aloud, commanding, entitled, unquestionable. He had always spoken in absolutes. My mother always backed him. My brother Derek always benefited. And me, I was expected to sacrifice, to obey, to keep silent. Something cracked inside me. I had endured years of being the provider without acknowledgement. I had swallowed their rules, their demands, their erasure of my milestones. But this was too much. Selling the one thing I had earned entirely on my own, expecting me to pay thousands for Derek while dismissing my own needs. No, that single word pulsed in my chest like a heartbeat. For the first time in my life, I knew I would not bend. As I stood in that cramped supply closet, I thought about the irony. Birthdays were supposed to mark growth, freedom, the beginning of a new year of life. Instead, mine marked a decision, one that would sever me from everything I had known. And here's the truth I want you to hear if you've ever felt used or unseen by those closest to you. Your worth is not measured by what others take from you. It is measured by what you refuse to surrender. This was the moment my story began. The moment I chose myself over a family system designed to drain me. That was only the first shock of the day. What followed was even darker, more painful, but also more liberating than anything I could have imagined. I walked back onto the pediatric floor, but the beeping monitors and hushed voices around me blurred into background noise. My mind kept circling back to those messages. My car gone. My savings already claimed for Derek. And my father's smug line, "Family comes first." For as long as I could remember, family comes first meant one thing in our house: my father's authority was absolute, and Derek's needs came before mine. It never meant fairness. It never meant love. It meant I had to give, and they had to take. Let me take you back for a moment. I grew up in a house where my father, Frank, ruled with iron authority. He decided what counted as success, who deserved praise, and who didn't. My mother, Linda, followed every word without question, smoothing over his harshness with a forced smile. And then there was Derek, my younger brother, the golden child. He was the pride of the family, the one who could do no wrong. Me, I was the responsible one, the provider, the scapegoat when things went wrong. By the time I was 16, I was juggling babysitting and grocery shifts while Derek lounged at home playing video games, surrounded by the newest sneakers and sports gear my parents bought him. At 18, when most kids I knew were worrying about prom or graduation, my parents handed me a new rule: $400 rent every month. I paid it because what choice did I have? Yet I never saw those payments improve the house. No repairs, no upgrades. It simply disappeared into the family's bottomless pit of expenses. Meanwhile, Derek never paid a dime. His birthday parties were elaborate, his hobbies fully funded. When he turned 16, he was handed his first car as if it were a right. I, on the other hand, had to scrape together every cent for my Toyota Corolla, and when I finally brought it home, my father scoffed. "Could have gotten you a better deal if you'd asked." That car wasn't just transportation, it was proof that I could create something of my own outside his control. But today he had stripped even that from me. Standing in that supply closet, phone still clutched in my hand, a realization sank in. I had allowed this hierarchy to define me. I had been trained to believe that compliance kept the peace, that sacrifice proved my worth. But peace had never really existed, had it only control. And now on my 24th birthday, I finally understood the truth. If I didn't change the script, this cycle would never end. Before I continue, let me pause and ask you, have you ever lived in a family where your needs were invisible, where someone else's comfort always came before your own? If you have, you'll know the quiet rage that builds inside. You'll know how hard it is to finally say, enough. If this resonates with you, take a second to share where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard. That's why I'm telling you mine. The Sanders household wasn't a home, it was a hierarchy, and I was done living at the bottom. I straightened my scrubs, forced a steady breath, and stepped back into the ward. To my patients, I was the calm, reliable nurse who could handle anything. Inside, though I had crossed a line I could never uncross. My father's message was meant to break me, but instead, it awakened me. Something was shifting. I didn't know yet how far it would go or how much it would cost, but I knew one thing for certain. I would no longer be their victim. That night when I returned home for my so-called birthday dinner, I would face them. And for the first time in 24 years, I would not back down. The bus ride home that evening rattled louder than usual. Every stop, every squeal of the brakes felt like a countdown to the confrontation I could no longer avoid. I stared out the window watching the city lights blur, and my mind drifted back to how this cycle of injustice had started. When I was 16, while Derek enjoyed his weekends at the arcade or the basketball court, I was babysitting neighborhood kids. I stocked shelves at the grocery store until midnight, then woke up early for school the next morning. My parents called it building character. But when Derek wanted the latest video game console, the money appeared instantly. By 18, I thought life might get easier. Graduation was on the horizon, and I dreamed of leaving for college. That's when my father declared that I would pay $400 in rent every month. I was still in high school. Most of my friends were focused on prom dresses or applying to universities. I was calculating how many shifts it would take to cover my new family obligation. I always paid, and still nothing in the house changed. No new furniture, no repaired appliances. My father would sneer, "You should be grateful we let you stay here so cheap." Meanwhile, Derek's room overflowed with sneakers, jerseys, and eventually his own first car. A shiny gift handed to him with no strings attached. I learned quickly that family shares meant you sacrifice. When I won a scholarship to help pay for community college, my parents demanded I hand it over because they were providing a roof. When my grandmother left me her pearl necklace, it appeared around my mother's neck at the next family dinner. She smiled at me and said, "Family shares." Those words were a knife disguised as kindness. Still, I pressed forward. I worked nights, studied on weekends, and scraped by until I earned my nursing license. My hospital hired me right after graduation. For the first time, I felt like I had built something that belonged to me. When I bought my Toyota Corolla with my own savings, I thought, finally, they cannot touch this. That car represented freedom, control, proof that I was no longer under their thumb. And now on my 24th birthday, they had stolen even that. As the bus jolted to another stop, I clenched my fists. Every memory of being stripped, every injustice I had swallowed came rushing back. The scholarship, the necklace, the rent, the countless times I was told I was lucky just to have a roof. Lucky. Lucky to be used, lucky to be overlooked, lucky to pay so Derek could thrive. I felt my jaw tighten, no more. I want to ask you something here. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Would you have walked away earlier or kept paying to keep the peace? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I know many of you have faced this same kind of choice. By the time the bus rolled into my stop, my decision was carved into me like stone. I wasn't going to give them another dollar. I wasn't going to stay silent. The years of obedience had ended the moment that message lit up my phone. I stepped off the bus, the night air cool against my face, and I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. Fear of the storm waiting inside my house, relief that I had finally chosen myself. Tomorrow maybe I would crumble under the weight of their anger. Maybe I would question if I had made the right choice. But not tonight. Tonight I was done being the scapegoat. And as I walked up the driveway, the empty space where my car had once been felt like a promise. A painful reminder of what they had taken and a clear sign of what I was about to reclaim. But dinner was waiting inside. My father's voice, my mother's manipulations, Derek's smug entitlement. They had no idea that I was no longer the obedient daughter they thought they controlled. The door creaked as I stepped inside. The smell of pot roast filled the air, my mother's signature meal for special occasions. But nothing about this night felt special to me. My father was slouched in his recliner eyes, glued to the television, one hand gripping a glass of water, as if it were a throne's scepter. He didn't even turn his head when he called out, "There she is. Birthday girl finally home. Dinner's almost ready." His tone carried no warmth, no hint of celebration, just ownership. I set my work bag down, slowly scanning the room. The good dishes were laid out on the table, candles flickering in the dining room. This wasn't a celebration, it was a stage. A carefully set trap, disguised as family dinner. I glanced toward the driveway through the window, hoping for a miracle. But the empty patch of concrete where my Corolla had sat that morning confirmed it. My car was gone, my freedom stolen. When I walked into the kitchen, my mother turned, wiping her hands on a towel. "Let's not start the evening with arguments," she said softly, as if anticipating what was about to erupt. "I made your favorite dessert." I bit back a laugh that felt more like a choke. Chocolate cake wasn't going to erase fraud. It wasn't going to buy back my car. The sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs broke the moment. Derek bounded down with a wide grin plastered across his face. "Hey, tuition fairy," he joked, nudging my arm. "Dad says you're covering my first semester. Perfect timing since I just ordered my new laptop." His words were salt on an open wound. The entitlement in his tone burned through me. I forced myself to stay calm, but inside something snapped. Years of swallowing insults, years of carrying burdens that weren't mine, years of being erased, all of it funneled into a single thought: I will not do this anymore. We sat at the table, the clinking of silverware and the hum of forced small talk filling the room. The weather, hospital gossip, Derek's dorm assignment, not one word about my birthday, not one word about my car. They spoke as if none of it mattered, as if their betrayal was normal. I picked at my food, barely tasting it. My father chewed loudly, his gaze shifting between me and the flickering candlelight. Finally, he cleared his throat, his voice carrying the weight of command. "So about Derek's tuition, we need the check by Friday. University wants first payment before orientation." The words landed like a gavel. The trial had begun. I set my fork down carefully, steadying my breath. "I'm not paying Derek's tuition," I said. My voice was calm, but each word carried steel. Silence crashed over the table. My mother froze mid-motion with the serving spoon. Derek's grin faltered. My father's knuckles tightened around his glass, his jaw hardening. "What do you mean you're not paying?" he asked, voice low controlled, but his eyes flashed with fury. "It means no," I said. "I'm not giving you $5,800. I'm not covering Derek's education. And you had no legal right to sell my car." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Victoria, be reasonable. We've given you everything. A home support through nursing school meals every night." I cut her off. "I paid for nursing school myself. I pay rent. I buy groceries. And that car was mine. Paid with my money titled in my name until Dad forged his signature and took it from me." The mask cracked. My father slammed his glass onto the table, water spilling across the cloth. His voice boomed. "You ungrateful little, after everything we've done for you. You live in our house practically free." I leaned forward, my voice unwavering. "I pay $400 every month, plus utilities, plus groceries. That is not free." For the first time, Derek's smug expression faltered. He glanced between us, confusion clouding his face. "Wait, so you're not paying my tuition? Dad said it was all arranged." "No, Derek," I said firmly, turning to him. "I'm not paying your tuition. Dad sold my car illegally. You'll need to apply for student loans like everyone else." The air grew thick with tension. My mother began to cry, tears streaming down her face, her usual tactic when things spiraled beyond her control. "Why are you doing this to us? To your brother? We're family." I met her eyes, my voice cold but clear. Family doesn't steal. Family doesn't forge signatures. Family doesn't demand someone's savings as if it's owed. My father's face turned a deep shade of red. He pushed back his chair, standing over me. "You have two options, Victoria. Either you write the check for your brother by Friday, or you find somewhere else to live. Family comes first, and if you can't prioritize family, you don't deserve to be part of this one." I stood slowly, rising to meet his glare. "Is that your final decision?" He leaned closer, his voice a hiss. "If you walk out that door without agreeing to help, you're dead to me. Dead to me. No daughter of mine would be so selfish." But this time the threat didn't land. This time I wasn't afraid. Something inside me had shifted, and there was no turning back. So, the ultimatum had been given, but for the first time I was ready to give my own. The silence after my father's threat hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had yet to burn out. My mother's sobs echoed in the dining room, but her tears no longer pulled at me the way they once had. Derek sat, frozen, torn between entitlement and dawning realization. And my father, he stood tall, furious, certain that his ultimatum had cornered me. But what he didn't know was that I had already chosen. His words were supposed to frighten me back into obedience. Instead, they confirmed what I had suspected for months, that every move, every decision had been part of a plan. The acceptance letters, the celebration dinners, the endless praise of Derek's future. None of it was simply joy, it was strategy. They had been grooming me, setting me up to fund his education while erasing my independence. I looked at my father, steady and calm. "If that's the choice, then I'll leave." For a moment, shock flickered across his face. He wasn't used to resistance. He wasn't used to no. I stood and excused myself from the table, ignoring my mother's cries and Derek's confused protests. Upstairs, I closed my bedroom door and leaned against it, my heart pounding, but my mind sharp. I pulled out a notebook, the same one I had used for study schedules and budget tracking. Tonight, it would become my record of truth. I listed every dollar I had paid since I was 18. Rent, utilities, groceries, the scholarship that vanished, the jewelry that disappeared, and now the Corolla worth $12,000 stolen with a forged signature. By the time I finished, the total neared $43,000. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from clarity. This wasn't just manipulation, it was theft, it was exploitation, and it was systematic. I paused to breathe, my chest tight, but my resolve firm. This was the night I would start building my escape, not just physically, but legally. Before I continue, let me say this. Many of you watching might know exactly what it feels like to be trapped in a family system that drains you. Maybe you felt obligated to keep giving while no one gives back. If you know that feeling, take a second to subscribe, because these stories are not rare, and we need to stand together against them. Back in my room, I pulled out a manila folder stuffed with receipts and documents. I had kept them for tax purposes, at least that's what I told my parents when I insisted on written receipts for my rent. But in reality, I had been preparing for this moment without realizing it. I flipped through page after page, 6 years of evidence, 6 years of sacrifice. And now proof that I had been more than a dependent. I had been a provider forced into a role I never agreed to. My phone buzzed again. Derek's message lit the screen. "Thanks for helping with tuition, sis. Dad says you're covering first semester. You're the best." The arrogance of it made me laugh bitterly. Derek wasn't malicious, not really. But he had been raised to believe my sacrifices were normal. He had never questioned where the money came from because he never had to. I didn't respond. Not tonight. Instead, I opened my laptop. If my father wanted to play this as family business, then I would treat it as exactly that business. I began drafting a spreadsheet line by line. Dates, amounts, purposes, everything accounted for. And beneath it, I started a letter. Not of apology, not of explanation, but of declaration. They had taken nearly half a lifetime of earnings, and I was done letting it happen. The house creaked around me, the familiar sounds of my childhood home, my father's heavy footsteps downstairs, my mother's muffled sobs, Derek's laughter drifting from his room. But for the first time, I realized that none of this defined me anymore. I wasn't bound by their hierarchy. I wasn't trapped by their authority. This was no longer just about a car. It was about reclaiming my voice, my worth, and my future. That night I didn't sleep. I planned. I gathered. I prepared. And by morning I knew exactly what I would do next. Morning came with an eerie quiet. The house smelled faintly of coffee and reheated pot roast, but there was no happy birthday greeting waiting at my place at the table. No card, no gift. Just silence broken only by the clatter of Derek's spoon in his cereal bowl. My mother glanced at me but quickly looked away, her eyes swollen from tears. My father sat across from me, the newspaper stretched wide, his voice cold and deliberate when he finally spoke. Friday, 5,800. Don't test me. I didn't answer. I simply sipped my coffee and studied his face. The man who had spent my whole life convincing me that obedience was survival. The man who thought love was measured in control. Inside, I was no longer afraid. I was calculating. That day at the hospital, the weight of my decision pressed against me like a second skin. I dispensed medications, charted vitals, and smiled at anxious parents. But behind the mask of composure, my mind replayed the night before. Every detail, every word, every moment when I had finally said no. Around noon, my colleague Amelia appeared at the nurse's station with a cupcake topped with a single candle. "Make a wish," she whispered, careful not to draw attention. Her kindness nearly broke me. Tears stung my eyes not because of the cupcake, but because of the stark contrast. A coworker who had known me for only a year showed more genuine care than my parents had in decades. I closed my eyes and made a wish not for a new car, not for riches, but for freedom. After my shift ended, I canceled dinner plans with friends. They were disappointed, but I couldn't tell them the truth yet. I needed clarity before I spoke aloud what I was about to do. The bus ride home was long, each stop hammering the decision deeper into me. I was leaving, not just for a night, for good. The house was staged again when I arrived. The good dishes still on the table, the pot roast reheated, my mother fussing with dessert plates. "We can talk about this calmly," she said, her voice sweet but brittle. My father didn't look up from his chair. Derek bounded in, oblivious as always. I sat through the meal in silence. Every bite tasted like ash. And then my father leaned forward, his voice commanding. "The check, Victoria. Friday." That was the moment I spoke with finality. No, not this time, not ever again. He slammed his fist against the table. My mother burst into tears. Derek sputtered in disbelief, but I didn't waver. I had rehearsed this moment in my head all day, and now the words flowed with clarity. "You stole my car. You forged my name. You've taken thousands from me over the years, calling it family duty. But family doesn't steal. Family doesn't exploit. And family doesn't silence their own daughter to bankroll their golden child." The room erupted. My father shouted, my mother pleaded, Derek whined about his future. But through the chaos, I felt something extraordinary: peace. 'Cause I wasn't backing down. That night, after the house quieted, I began packing. 2 suitcases, a backpack, and a folder of documents. Clothing, nursing gear, personal papers, receipts from 6 years of rent, bank statements, proof of ownership of my car, evidence of every dollar siphoned from me. The house creaked with familiar night sounds as I moved, silently careful to avoid the noisy step on the staircase. Years of night shifts had trained me to walk like a ghost. By midnight, I was nearly done. At 3 in the morning, I would leave this house for the last time. And I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I was leaving with the truth. Because this wasn't just a birthday. It was a rebirth. 3 in the morning arrived like a thief. The house slept in uneasy silence, but I was wide awake, fully dressed, suitcases lined up neatly by the door. Each zipper pulled shut felt like another chain breaking. I had spent 24 years inside these walls, yet tonight the air felt foreign, almost suffocating. I moved like a shadow down the staircase, each step rehearsed to avoid the squeaky floorboards. My father's snores thundered from the master bedroom, a sound that had once made me feel trapped now, only reminding me how small his world truly was. My mother's restless turning creaked the old mattress. Derek's video game console hummed faintly behind his door. None of them stirred as I passed. In the kitchen, I placed a thick folder squarely on the counter. Across the top, in bold black letters, I had written, Family Financial Accounting. Inside 27 pages of evidence, rent receipts, bank statements, the forged title to my car, and a tally of $43,000 siphoned from me over the years. I didn't hide it. I wanted them to find it, to choke on the truth. Beside the folder, I left nothing else. No apology, no explanation, just the facts. When I stepped outside, the chill of early morning wrapped around me. The driveway gaped empty where my Corolla should have been. That vacant patch of concrete was the perfect metaphor for what they had stolen. Yet as I stood there waiting for the Uber I had called, I realized something profound. An empty space can also be a beginning. The headlights of a small sedan approached. The driver, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, popped the trunk without asking questions. She glanced at my suitcases and then at my face. Her only words were, "Long night." I smiled faintly. Long life, but it's getting better. The car pulled away from the curb, and I watched the house shrink in the rearview mirror. For the first time in years, I felt light. The weight of forced obligation, of constant demands, of silent suffering, it all began to lift. As the city lights stretched before me, I wondered how many others had endured the same quiet exploitation from their own families. How many had swallowed the phrase, "family comes first," when it really meant your sacrifice comes first. Maybe you have lived it too. Maybe you've carried burdens that were never yours to carry. If that's you, tell me in the comments what moment finally pushed you to say enough. Your stories matter as much as mine. When we reached Amelia's apartment building, she was already waiting in the lobby, her hair tousled from sleep, but her eyes sharp with concern. She wrapped me in a hug before I could even speak. "Guest room's yours for as long as you need," she said. "No judgment, no questions, just support." The kind of support I had begged for all my life, only to be told I was ungrateful. The guest room was small but perfect, clean sheets, a warm lamp, and blessed silence. I unpacked only the essentials, tucked my folder of evidence beneath the bed, and collapsed. Sleep claimed me instantly. For the first time in years, I dreamed without fear. Morning sunlight streamed through the blinds when I awoke, disoriented at first, then sharply aware. It was my birthday, the day I walked away from being their scapegoat. My phone buzzed incessantly, vibrating against the nightstand. 27 missed calls, 43 texts, voicemails stacked one after another. I silenced it without listening. I didn't need to hear their voices anymore. The battle had already shifted. Last night was escape. Today would be strategy. And I was ready. What? Because leaving wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of taking back what was mine. The first full morning away from my parents' house felt surreal. Sunlight filtered through Amelia's blinds, and for a moment, I wondered if it had all been a dream. The confrontation, the ultimatum, the silent packing in the dead of night. But then I saw my suitcases lined up against the wall, the folder of documents tucked neatly beneath the bed. Reality returned with a rush. I had done it. I had left. Amelia was already in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone with a mug of coffee in hand. "Morning, warrior," she said with a soft smile. "How are you feeling?" Like I should have done this years ago, I admitted. My voice was steadier than I expected. She gestured toward my buzzing phone on the counter. "Your family has been calling nonstop. It's been vibrating for over an hour." I picked it up reluctantly. Dozens of missed calls. Over 40 text messages. Voicemails stacked endlessly. Not just from my parents, but from aunts, uncles, even family friends. The storm had begun. I opened a few texts. My father's tone was furious. "You're being ridiculous. Come home and apologize. Family comes first." My mother's messages shifted between guilt and manipulation. "You're breaking your father's heart. Think of Derek's future. We can work this out." Derek's was the most galling way to ruin my college plans, sis. Selfish much. But then came one that made me pause. Aunt Susan, my father's sister. "What did you leave behind?" "Your father is apoplectic. Did you really document everything none of us knew? They're panicking. Call me when you're safe. For the first time, someone acknowledged the possibility that I wasn't crazy, that my voice had weight, that my evidence mattered. I sipped coffee slowly, letting the bitter warmth steady me. I realized that what I had left on the kitchen counter wasn't just a stack of papers, it was a detonator. My parents had spent years crafting an illusion of authority, hiding their exploitation under the banner of family duty. But the evidence stripped away that facade. And now they were terrified. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years I had been afraid of their power. Now it was they who feared mine. I turned to Amelia, voice firmer now. I need to call a lawyer, today. She nodded without hesitation. I'll drive you. Later that morning, I sat in a quiet office across from Judith Bennett, an attorney who specialized in family financial abuse. She studied my folder with sharp eyes, flipping page after page, her pen scratching notes. After nearly an hour, she looked up. You have a very strong case. The car sale is clear-cut fraud. The forged title alone could trigger criminal charges. The rent payments, though murkier, establish a consistent pattern of financial exploitation. Combined, it paints a compelling picture. Her words lit a spark of validation inside me. For so long, I had doubted myself, wondered if I was overreacting, if I was selfish for wanting boundaries. But here was a professional confirming what I had always known. Deep down, I was not crazy. I was exploited. Judith outlined our plan. First, a formal demand letter for the $12,000 from the car sale. Second, documentation submitted to local authorities regarding the forgery. Third, preparation for civil action if necessary. Most cases like this settle once the exploitative party realizes exposure is imminent, she explained. No one wants this kind of abuse made public, especially with evidence this thorough. I nodded each step, solidifying my resolve. This wasn't just about reclaiming money, it was about reclaiming myself. By afternoon, Amelia and I toured an apartment complex recommended by another nurse. The available one-bedroom wasn't luxurious, but it was clean, safe, and within my budget. I signed the lease on the spot, paying the deposit from my savings. As I held the keys in my hand, I thought of my father's sneer when I first bought my Corolla. Could have gotten you a better deal. This time he had no say. This key, this space, this choice was mine. I returned to Amelia's that evening, exhausted but lighter. For the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting to my family's demands. I was setting the terms, and I knew this was only the beginning. By the end of that first week, my phone had become a weapon aimed at me. Calls poured in at all hours, voicemails layered on top of each other, switching from rage to guilt to bargaining. My father's voice thundered through one, "You're destroying this family. No one will believe you over us." In another, my mother whimpered, "Please come home. Derek's future is at stake. Don't do this to us." But the one that revealed the truth most clearly came late one night. My father, his words clipped almost desperate. "What will it take to make this go away? Name your price." There it was, years of exploitation reduced to another transaction. He hadn't understood it all. He thought my silence could still be bought. I didn't answer. Instead, I forwarded every voicemail to Judith, my lawyer. Each message wasn't just manipulation, it was evidence. Proof of a family system collapsing under the weight of its own corruption. Meanwhile, extended relatives began chiming in. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years messaged me. "Your dad says you're making things up. Is it true?" Others admitted they were shocked by the documents I had left behind. Aunt Susan, the one relative who seemed genuinely horrified, called me every evening. I never knew, she whispered one night. "I always thought Frank was strict, but this is something darker." Her validation mattered more than I wanted to admit. It reminded me I wasn't crazy for seeing the abuse. But if you've ever broken away from a toxic system, you know this moment, the point where pressure intensifies. The abusers scramble to regain control. They recruit allies. They twist the narrative. They make you question whether walking away was worth the cost. And I'll be honest, there were nights when doubt clawed at me. Was I heartless? Was I selfish? Was I really going to cut ties forever? If you're still listening, I want to leave you with a question to hold on to. What would you have done if it were your father threatening to erase you unless you paid? Would you fight back, or would you stay silent for the sake of peace? Think about it and stay with me, because what happened next turned the entire story upside down. The legal process moved quickly. Judith filed a formal demand letter for the $12,000 from my car plus additional compensation for years of coerced payments. She also reported the forged title transfer to the authorities. This is fraud, plain and simple, she told me. They won't be able to explain this away. Almost immediately, panic spread through my family. My father's calls shifted from threats to frantic explanations. You misunderstood. It wasn't fraud, just a clerical mistake. Then back to rage. If you pursue this, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. The cycle was predictable, now. Anger, guilt, bargaining, repeat. But I had something stronger than their voices. I had proof. At the same time, my life outside that house began to rebuild. My new apartment wasn't perfect. The walls were beige, the furniture sparse, but it was mine. I slept without fear of footsteps outside my door. I ate dinner without bracing for insults. And for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future not dictated by their demands. Yet even as freedom took root, the storm raged harder. My father tried to access my bank accounts. Fraud alerts lit up my phone. Derek messaged in confusion, Dad keeps changing his story about the car. Mom slipped and mentioned Grandma's jewelry too. What's real? The cracks were spreading. The golden child was beginning to see the truth. And then the knock on my apartment door came. Not from my parents, not from Derek, but from someone who would turn the entire battle in a direction I hadn't expected. The knock echoed through my apartment, sharp and deliberate. For a split second, my heart leapt into my throat. I half expected my father, standing there red-faced, ready to drag me back home with threats and accusations. But when I opened the door, it was Aunt Susan. Her eyes were tired, her hair pulled back hastily, and in her hand was a folder, bulging with papers. I had to see you, she said quickly, stepping inside before I could even invite her. Frank is unraveling. He's shouting at neighbors, calling lawyers, trying to control the story. But the documents you left, they've shaken everything. She set the folder on my kitchen counter and pressed a hand to her chest. I didn't know Victoria. I truly didn't. All these years I thought you were just independent, that you didn't need help. I never realized you were carrying the weight of everyone else's comfort. Her voice cracked. Your grandmother warned me once. She said your father had a dangerous way of confusing control with love. I should have listened. I stood frozen, unsure how to respond. For so long, every adult in my family had looked away, had accepted the dynamic as just the way things were. Now seeing genuine regret in her eyes, I felt the smallest flicker of hope. Maybe I wasn't completely alone in this bloodline. Susan slid a stack of papers toward me. These are emails and notes from years ago. Times your father manipulated family finances. Times he demanded help from me too. I never kept records like you did, but I want you to have these. Maybe they'll strengthen your case. I thumbed through the pages. Each one added fuel to the fire. More evidence of a man who had built his kingdom on everyone else's sacrifice. But what stunned me most wasn't the documents. It was Derek's name scribbled in Susan's handwriting. He came to me yesterday, she said softly. He's confused. He told me Dad always said you were happy to help, that you never complained. But now he's seen the proof. He's starting to question everything. The golden child, the untouchable one, was finally seeing cracks in the illusion. I sank into a chair, my hands shaking as I held the folder. I don't know what to believe anymore, I admitted. Part of me still feels guilty, like I'm betraying them. But another part of me knows this is the only way to survive. Susan reached across the table, her voice steady. Survival isn't betrayal. Choosing freedom isn't betrayal. What they did to you, that was betrayal. Her words pierced something inside me. For years, my parents had twisted loyalty into a leash. Now here was someone finally cutting that rope. I want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever had a moment when the people who should have protected you instead tore you down? when you realized survival meant breaking away, even if it meant losing them. Share your thoughts below because your voice might be the one someone else needs to hear. By the time Susan left, night had fallen. My apartment was dim, the beige walls casting long shadows. I looked around at the bare furniture, the suitcases stacked in the corner, the emptiness that might have felt lonely a week ago. But tonight, it felt powerful. This was mine. Chosen by me. Built by me. The storm outside my walls was only getting stronger. My parents were scrambling. Derek was unraveling. Extended relatives were whispering. And now, with Susan's support and new evidence, I held more leverage than ever. Yet, deep down, I knew this was only a step. The real confrontation still loomed. Not another dinner table argument. Not another ultimatum shouted across a room. But a confrontation written in law, stamped by courts, undeniable to anyone who tried to silence me. I would be ready for it. The following days blurred into a whirlwind of paperwork, phone calls, and endless buzzing from my silenced phone. Every time I switched it on, a flood of messages awaited me. My mother begging my father, threatening Derek, confused extended relatives, demanding explanations. But I no longer engaged. I forwarded everything to Judith, my lawyer. Evidence, not emotional bait. Judith moved fast. The forged title for my car became the centerpiece of our case. Forgery is fraud, she explained matter-of-factly. There's no gray area. Your father committed a crime. Hearing those words was surreal. For years I had been told to stop being dramatic, to stop overreacting. Yet, here was a professional stating clearly I was right all along. She filed a formal demand letter, $12,000 for the car plus additional damages. She prepared a packet for local authorities documenting the fraudulent transfer. And she warned me, be prepared. They'll panic. They'll push harder. But that pressure is a sign you're winning. She was right. The moment the demand letter landed, my father's tone shifted again. His voicemails oscillated between rage and pleading. You'll ruin us if this goes public. Do you really want to destroy your own family? Let's settle this privately. No lawyers. His desperation bled through every word. Meanwhile, Derek reached out again, this time with something different. I've been reading what you left behind. I had no idea. I thought Dad was telling the truth when he said you were happy to help. I'm sorry. I didn't see it. For the first time, guilt flickered in his words. Maybe, just maybe, the golden child was waking up from his privilege-induced haze. Outside the legal chaos, I was building my new life piece by piece. My apartment, though small, was becoming home. I bought a second-hand couch, hung photos of friends who felt more like family, and filled the space with small plants Amelia gifted me. Each detail reminded me this life was mine, untouched by their control. Still, there were nights when loneliness whispered at my edges. I would sit on that couch staring at the beige walls, wondering what it meant to cut ties with the people who raised me. Could I still call them family? Did I want to? Or had they forfeited that title the moment they sold my car and demanded my savings? The questions lingered heavy and unanswerable. But every time doubt rose, I remembered the empty driveway, the missing necklace, the rent receipts. And I reminded myself love doesn't come with an invoice. One evening, Amelia cooked dinner for both of us. As we ate, she looked at me seriously. You're not just fighting for money, you know. You're fighting for the right to live without chains. Her words sank deep. She was right. This wasn't only about $12,000 or even $43,000. It was about the years of my life stolen by fear and obedience. It was about reclaiming the power to say no. I looked around my apartment, the chipped table, the worn couch, the plants leaning toward the window. Imperfect, yes. But every piece had been chosen by me, not imposed by my father's authority. I want to ask you this. What would freedom look like in your life? If you could cut one toxic tie, if you could walk away from one chain, what would it be? Leave your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes naming that chain is the first step toward breaking it. The legal storm was building. My father had contacted 3 different lawyers, but none of them would take his case once they saw the evidence. Rumors swirled through the family that he was unraveling his pride, cracking for the first time. My mother cycled between weeping and sending manipulative messages through relatives. Derek was silent now, perhaps realizing his college dreams would have to be built the way mine were on his own effort. And me, I was no longer just surviving. I was preparing for victory. Wait, because soon there would be consequences my parents couldn't escape. It was nearly 2 weeks since I had walked out of my parents' house, and the fallout was still spreading like wildfire. My phone remained flooded, calls, texts, voicemails, all repeating the same cycle of anger, guilt, and bargaining. But I had learned to mute it to save every word as evidence instead of letting it pierce my heart. Then came the news that shifted everything. Aunt Susan called her voice taut with urgency. "Your father tried to report your car as stolen," she said. The police asked for the title. When he handed over the altered document, the officer spotted the forgery immediately. "They're talking about possible charges." I closed my eyes, leaning back against my apartment wall. So it was happening. The lies that had always been hidden inside family walls were finally spilling into the open. For years, I had been painted as ungrateful, dramatic, selfish. Now the truth was undeniable. Susan went on, her tone softer now. "Your mother hasn't stopped crying. Derek's applying for student loans. Frank's furious, says you've destroyed everything. But Victoria, you didn't destroy it. You just exposed it." Her words echoed in me long after we hung up. Exposed. That was the right word. I hadn't created the rot, I had simply pulled back the curtain. That evening, I sat alone at my small dining table, staring at the settlement letter Judith had just forwarded me. My father's attorney was already negotiating. They were willing to pay back not only the value of my car, but additional compensation for years of financial abuse. The figure $38,000. It wasn't the full amount they had taken, but it was more than I expected. Proof that their pride was bending under pressure. Proof that I had finally forced them to see me not as their scapegoat, but as a woman who would no longer be silenced. Still, part of me trembled, because settlement meant finality. It meant closing a chapter I had lived in for 24 years. It meant admitting that reconciliation, the dream of one day being loved and respected by my parents, was dead. I thought back to the night I left, to the way my father had hissed, "You're dead," to me across the dinner table, to the tears in my mother's eyes that were never about me, only about losing control, to Derek's clueless grin when he called me tuition fairy, and then I thought about Amelia's cupcake with a single candle, about Susan's steady voice saying, "Survival isn't betrayal," about the keys to my new apartment clutched in my hand. Which version of family did I want to carry forward? I leaned forward, pen in hand, ready to sign the settlement. But before I did, I whispered to myself, "This is not the end. This is the beginning." And I want you to think about that too. Every story has a twist. Sometimes the moment you think you're losing everything is the very moment you're gaining freedom. Stay with me, because what came next wasn't just about money. It was about rewriting my entire life. When the settlement check finally arrived by certified mail, I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I simply held it in my hands and breathed. $38,000, not a gift, not charity, restitution, a piece of the freedom they had stolen. I deposited it carefully, dividing it between a savings account, an emergency fund, and the down payment for a used car. Each transaction felt like a declaration I will never let them take from me again. That night, Amelia invited a few coworkers over. They brought small gifts for my apartment plants, framed photos, even a replacement stethoscope charm. To Victoria, Amelia toasted, who finally realized her worth isn't measured by those who try to diminish it. I felt my chest swell with something I hadn't felt in years. Not pride, not relief, but belonging. And that's when the story shifted again, because as my world grew stronger, my family's carefully constructed facade began to collapse. The settlement had been signed, sealed, and deposited, but the aftershocks of my departure were only beginning to ripple outward. Word spread quickly through our extended family, and even into the neighborhood where I grew up. The perfect image my parents had worked so hard to project was crumbling, and they had no control over the narrative anymore. Susan called again, her voice heavy but steady. "Everyone knows now. Your cousins, your uncles, even the neighbors. People are shocked. Frank's temper has gotten worse. He's yelling in public. Your mother is embarrassed to leave the house. And Derek, he's finally asking questions they can't answer. I sat on my small couch, listening in silence. The beige walls of my apartment no longer felt empty, they felt safe. They held my secrets, my freedom, my future. Derek reached out the next day, not with entitlement this time, but confusion. Dad always said you were fine helping out, that you volunteered. But Mom slipped about Grandma's jewelry, and now I don't know what's true. Did they really take your scholarship? Your car money? All those years of rent? For the first time in our lives, my brother sounded less like the golden child and more like a boy betrayed. I texted back simply, yes, every word is true, and I have the proof. His response came slowly, I'm sorry, I didn't see it. I didn't want to see it. I didn't forgive him instantly, but his words cracked something open, a possibility of rebuilding not under our parents' rules, but on equal ground. Meanwhile, my father's silence grew louder. After the settlement, he stopped calling directly, letting my mother or others carry messages. According to Susan, his pride had been shattered more than his wallet. He doesn't understand why you didn't just settle this within the family, she said. He still thinks you betrayed him instead of realizing he betrayed you. Her words stung, but they also clarified something. My father would never see me as more than a resource he lost control of. He would never apologize, and I no longer needed him to. I want to pause here and speak directly to you. Breaking away from a toxic family system isn't just about money or distance. It's about shifting the roles you were forced into. I stopped being the scapegoat the moment I said no. And you can too. If you believe these stories matter, subscribe and stay connected. You never know whose life your voice might change. Outside of family chaos, my career flourished. The hospital confirmed my promotion to charge nurse on the pediatric floor, and whispers of future leadership roles followed. For the first time, I could pour energy into growth instead of survival. My co-workers became my true support system, people who celebrated me without strings attached. On weekends, Amelia and I furnished my apartment piece by piece, a table from a thrift store, a rug from a yard sale, plants that slowly filled the balcony with color. Each item reminded me of something simple yet profound choice. For once, every corner of my life was chosen by me, but even in the safety of my new life, the old one reached for me. Messages still trickled in through relatives. My mother sent notes through Susan, always tinged with guilt. The house feels empty without you. Your father doesn't sleep. Please come back before it's too late. I read them, folded them away, and refused to answer. Not because I hated her, but because I finally loved myself enough to protect my boundaries. 1 year earlier, I would have caved. I would have given in to tears, to guilt, to the crushing weight of family comes first. But not now. Not anymore. Because once you've tasted freedom, chains no longer feel like home. 6 months after I walked out, life looked nothing like the one I had left behind. My apartment was no longer a bare shell with beige walls and secondhand furniture. It had become a reflection of me, plants thriving on the balcony, blue paint softening the walls, shelves lined with nursing textbooks, and photos of friends who had become family. Every corner carried a quiet declaration, I am free. The settlement money had been used carefully, almost reverently. A reliable used car replaced the one my father stole. An emergency savings account gave me a cushion I'd never had before. I chipped away at my student loans, each payment lightening a burden that once felt impossible. Nothing extravagant, nothing reckless, only choices that gave me stability and security. Choices made by me, for me. At the hospital, I thrived. The promotion to charge nurse had become permanent, and whispers of further advancement followed. For the first time, I could imagine a career unshadowed by constant financial sabotage. I signed up for additional certifications, investing in myself, instead of watching my hard-earned money vanish into the black hole of family expenses. Even my relationships shifted. Amelia and I grew inseparable: movie nights, hiking trips, Sunday brunches. The colleagues who once felt like acquaintances became a chosen family who celebrated my milestones without jealousy or debt attached. For the first time, birthdays came with laughter, small gifts, and genuine pride. No manipulation, no guilt. And Derek, our dynamic had changed too. He enrolled in community college instead of the state university, a humbling decision forced by reality. At first, he was bitter, blaming me for the disruption of his plans. But slowly, through late-night texts and cautious phone calls, he began to see the truth. He admitted catching our father snooping through his banking app, trying to access his savings. He confessed that he finally understood why I always looked exhausted, why money felt like a constant battlefield. One message from him still lingers in my mind. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. You were never selfish. You were surviving." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. For the first time, we were siblings instead of roles, no golden child, no scapegoat, just two young adults learning how to navigate the wreckage of a broken system. But my parents remained distant. According to Susan, their lives were unraveling. They sold the family home and downsized, claiming it was for practicality, but everyone knew pride had cracked them. My father refused to speak of me, insisting I was dead to him. My mother attempted reconciliation through others, always circling the same message: guilt without responsibility. "She misses you. The house feels empty. Please come back." But never. "We were wrong." Never. "We're sorry." The closest I came to acknowledgement was when Susan handed me a sealed envelope she found left on my old bed. Inside was my grandmother's pearl necklace, and earrings returned without note or explanation. A silent admission, perhaps, or a desperate attempt at repair. Either way, I accepted them, not as a gift from my mother, but as a reminder of the woman who had once whispered to me, "Always know your worth." And now I did. I want to ask you something. If you were handed back one stolen piece of your life, an heirloom, a dream, a piece of freedom, would you accept it, or would you send it back? Tell me in the comments, because I know some of you have faced choices like this. Standing in my apartment that evening, necklace in hand, I realized that worth doesn't come from what others return to you. It comes from what you decide never to surrender again. The year since my 24th birthday had been filled with endings, but it was also filled with beginnings, ones my parents could never take from me again. 1 year later, I stood on the balcony of my apartment, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise spill gold over the city skyline. The same city where 12 months earlier I had boarded a bus with nothing but 2 suitcases, a backpack, and the determination not to be broken. Now I breathed freely. No hidden debts. No threats disguised as obligations. No ultimatums about loyalty. The anniversary of that birthday text had arrived, and I found myself reflecting on everything that had changed. My parents remained distant shadows, still alive but no longer holding power over me. I heard updates only through Susan. My father had retired early, bitterness etched into his days. My mother struggled with her health but still refused to acknowledge her role in the fallout. They lived in a smaller home, now stripped of the image they once guarded so fiercely. Derek, however, was different. He visited me often, sometimes just to sit on the couch and talk about classes, sometimes to admit things he had uncovered about our parents. One evening he told me softly, "Dad tried to open my savings account again." That's when I finally understood. It was never about me or you. It was always about control. His words told me he had crossed into a new understanding. We were no longer rivals in a rigged game. We were survivors of the same system. I built new traditions, too. Holidays once filled with tension at the family table were now spent with Susan and her husband, with Amelia and my friends from the hospital. Laughter replaced shouting. Choice replaced duty. Belonging replaced hierarchy. Career-wise, I thrived. My role as charge nurse grew into leadership opportunities. Administrators hinted at management tracks. I took on certifications I'd once put off because of money. Each step forward reminded me I had been right to leave. The weight of financial exploitation no longer anchored me, and yet there were moments of grief too. Standing in my quiet apartment at night, I sometimes thought about the family I had wanted, the parents who might have been proud of me, who might have celebrated my milestones instead of erasing them. That loss was real, but grief is not the same as regret. I never regretted leaving. Because leaving gave me everything I had now: peace, independence, and the power to choose who deserved a place in my life. One evening, Susan shared something that crystallized the entire journey. Your grandmother once told me, she said, "Family isn't about blood, it's about respect, about love without strings." She would be proud of you, Victoria. You've built that family for yourself. She was right. My family now included friends who brought cupcakes to hospital shifts, a brother learning to unlearn his privilege, and an aunt who chose truth over loyalty to silence. It included every person who saw me not as an ATM, not as a scapegoat, but as myself. And that brings me to you, the one listening to my story right now. Maybe you faced something similar. Maybe you've been told that family comes first, when what it really meant was your sacrifice comes first. Maybe you've been guilted, silenced, or drained until you wondered if love was supposed to feel like chains. I'm here to tell you it isn't. Love doesn't steal. Love doesn't forge signatures. Love doesn't demand your freedom as payment. So ask yourself, what boundaries do you need to draw? What chains do you need to break? And when you're ready, don't just stop at this story. Join me in the next one, because there are countless voices rising against toxic legacies, and you'll want to hear them. The morning sun glowed brighter, warming my skin. 1 year ago, I had lost my car, my savings, and my so-called place in the family. Today, I stood stronger than ever. Because the truth is, this walking away wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of the life I deserved. When I look back now, I see that the real gift wasn't the settlement money or even the new apartment. The real gift was clarity. Clarity that I am not defined by what others take from me, but by what I choose to protect. There are still moments when the old doubts creep in. Sometimes I wonder what might have happened if I had stayed, if I had written that check for Derek, if I had pretended once again that everything was fine. But then I remember the emptiness I carried all those years, the constant fear of the next demand, the way my milestones were stolen before I could even celebrate them. And I know I chose the only path that led to peace. Life now isn't perfect, but it is mine. I wake up in a home I built, surrounded by people who respect me, with a career that grows because of my effort, not despite sabotage. I laugh more easily, I breathe more deeply, and I carry my grandmother's words in my heart every day: always know your worth. If my story has taught me anything, it's that family is not measured by DNA, but by respect, trust, and love without conditions. Sometimes the bravest act is not holding on, but letting go. So if you are listening and you recognize parts of your own life in mine, let this be your reminder: you deserve better. You deserve freedom. And you deserve to build a life that reflects who you are, not what others demand from you. Walking away was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of everything good that followed. And for the first time, I am truly free.